folks, this is Emily. Welcome to the Ag System Impacts video. I live in an agricultural community in eastern Iowa, and I care deeply about the ongoing resilience of America's producer communities. Many of my friends and neighbors, their generational mission is feeding America. They take that mission very seriously, and in this time of change, anyone who doesn't appreciate their hard work, resourcefulness, and current change response, they're missing the mark in a big way. Because we all need to eat. And a lot of people on the internet are concerned about famine, about hunger in America in the change time where we find ourselves. You should spend too much time worrying about that, about famine in America. Under projected change conditions, we do expect to see drops in production, but I see America as much more likely to experience a nutrient than a calorie deficit. And it's worth taking in the frame that for many Americans, nutrient rather than calorie deficit is a today problem. We live in a country with a lot of food available, and yet plenty of people, especially kids, go hungry. That's because of real problems with our food system, not the fact that our nation doesn't have enough food. I want to show you some climate projections for the continental US in this video with a focus on describing some of the likely severe impacts on our national agricultural landscape. I'll point out the large areas where I see strong evidence that communities like mine can and will keep feeding America, where we're going to continue to have strong, stable crop production, very much as a likelihood. We'll look also at regional change patterns with specific suggestions for each region around what kind of food system changes might be useful where you live. We're going to look at our three biggest problems first. The first area I want to look at is a hard one. I think it's inarguably the worst one. We're going to check out California's Central Valley. Because most people who try to eat healthy and look for domestic produce, their kitchens are full of produce from the Central Valley. That's where we produce a whole lot of tree fruits, nuts, berries, artichokes, garlic. A huge range of crops are grown in the Central Valley on a huge scale. This area is already feeling change hard. A lot of the work for those crops is not mechanized because it can't be mechanized. We're not on the threshold of mechanizing remaining farm labor that's currently done by hand. I think it's important for people to know that the strawberries we buy in stores are picked by hand. That's hard work to do all day long. And that's done by people. Farm worker deaths are up nationwide. With this heat and humidity that many of us are complaining about, it's killing people. 4 times the farm worker deaths now are being seen than a decade ago. A rapid increase in farm worker deaths. This heat is killing people now, and heat projections for the Central Valley are very serious. Let's take a look. So here we are in Jackie Ryan's visualization engine. We're looking at some straightforward 2C standard warming projections, county level data. This is the number of days over 100 and under 105 projected. You can see that the Central Valley is lit up. Looking at multiple weeks over 100, you see San Bernardino is lit up white because the Mojave is in there, right? But even when we get into like Kern County, Tulare, Fresno County, we're looking at more than a week of additional days over 105 in the hot season. We're looking at total hot season increases, total days over 95 and up, like 30, 40 days of additional really hot season increases in the Central Valley by 2C. With that increased heat, living things would need more water. But the San Joaquin Valley ranks high on the list of agricultural regions globally where our species have massively messed up the water cycle. We've massively overdrawn the groundwater. As you can see in this recent news article, that's causing farms to fail today. That's without the projected heat increases. The long-term outlook for California's Central Valley is really bad. As we see this disruption unfold, it's going to change agricultural markets and food systems throughout the U.S. Now, we're going to look at a second place where the situation looks rough I promise this video is going to perk up soon, but we need to look at our serious problems as we consider how to respond in the large parts of the country where the agricultural outlook is more positive. We got to look at the pain points first. Let's take a look in the Yuma area in Arizona. If you eat domestically produced lettuce, greens in the winter, that's where they come from. They make all of the greens that we eat in the winter, pretty much. And this is another area where the hot season increases are bananas. Let's check them out. So Yuma's down in Yuma County, looking at a 25-day increase in days over 100, a 31-day increase in days over 105, and a mere 22-ish day increase in days over 95. That is an astonishing total 78-day hot season increase, 78 additional days over 95 in the year. And we're talking about winter cropping in Yuma, right? We're talking about their productivity height is in the time of year the most the U.S. experiences is pretty cold. So that hot season extension, what that's going to do is it's going to knock out your shoulder season potential. It's going to narrow your potential cold time. And then look what happens. So now I'm in amocscenarios.org because we want to consider tipping point information in this analysis. There's Yuma. Let's drop a pin on it. We can see that if AMOC was behaving itself, if we weren't seeing evidence of ocean phase change, they'd be dealing with that shorter winter cropping season, but the cold extreme events would be less serious. So you'd feel maybe more confident you could really push through. However, with a collapsed AMOC, you're still seeing a pretty hard freeze. A freeze in extreme winter events, those cold freezes that do come around sometimes, that would be relatively close to a pre-industrial winter extreme event. As we're living in this time of change, all the signals are there that we need to look seriously at these AMOC scenarios, which would likely make hard winter freezes happen more often further south than we would have expected based on standard warming information. Let's check out that winter event band. So here we're looking at cold extreme events at 2C with AMOC functioning normally, and watch this area over the Gulf. If AMOC collapses, you'll notice that cold band for winter extreme events drops much further down than if we had normal continued functioning in ocean heat circulation. Okay, so putting attention back on Yuma, this key agricultural region. Under a tipping point scenario, we'd still be looking at these pretty intense heat increases for the summer, but the area will also keep experiencing occasional hard winter freezes that could wipe out the crop, a threat that would have been somewhat mitigated in a standard warming scenario. So this is great news, right? Like the edges that we thought we might be able to work look like they're getting taken away in some of our southern winter cropping areas. And that really bummed me out seeing this because it's going to put another limiting factor on what new plants we can grow in a lot of parts of the United States in a time where we might be wanting to establish a lot more genetic diversity. The range of what we can overwinter, the range of plants that are going to be able to survive freezing temperatures is not going to expand in the way it was projected to in the absence of this tipping point. Here, let's check out this crazy crap in the viewer. Let's look at North Florida, where we see a great example of collapsed AMOC, this tipping point, creating colder extreme events than we saw in a pre-industrial climate instead of the milder cold extreme events that we would have expected if ocean circulation was happening like normal. So extra cold winters plus long summer heat extensions for a lot of the South. I want to restate it one more time. In this snake eyes timeline we're all experiencing, we're looking at fairly large areas, especially in the Southeast, where we're not only looking much hotter in the summer, also facing a higher probability of colder winter events than expected. Yay. We'll talk more about this in the Southeast regional portion of this video, because I think that hits three of our biggest pain points. The reality that we're looking at big losses of production in the Central Valley and the whole Yuma Imperial area, and that we're probably going to see big increases in hard freeze events, even far south, is a hard reality with what I see as one big implication. There's a need for a huge increase in distributed seasonal production of table crops. When I talk about localizing food systems, I'm talking about growing the food that goes on your table right around you. All right, for all of our mental health, I think it's important for us to take a look now at a broad region with strong potential for agricultural resilience, both regarding staple crops such as corn and beans and table crops. On this map here, I'm talking about a broad sweep coming in from the Dakotas, coming down through central Illinois, Ohio, up through Pennsylvania, and inland New York. Broad sweep here. In this big region, we do expect drops in production because all across the US, we're expecting more irregular and variable weather patterns. But I think many people freak out and hear immediate starvation as soon as they hear drops in production. Let's take a minute and ground ourselves in the current production situation. So I woke up and was reading articles about this morning before I filmed, and I thought it was so relevant to this video. We're talking about thousands and thousands of American farmers who are currently looking at producing soybeans at a loss due to the changing international geopolitical landscape. So we're looking at a situation where there is economic pressure to drive change away from a major production of conventional staple crops and move towards table crops. Let's get back to climate, as we're talking about these pressures, these systems. Whether we're in a tipping point, as the evidence suggests, or not, we're looking at relative stability across models in a large portion of the US. If we are in the tipping point, temperature stability extends into central Illinois and covers Ohio, as well as the L1 and L2 regions. And it moves the stability in terms of temperature. Know what I'm saying? Temperature, not precipitation, all the way north in towards Winnipeg and Saskatoon. If we have hit that tipping point, that broad area looks more temperature stable than it did in standard warming projections, especially on account of the lower rate of winter change, looking at more potentially normal winters throughout this area. Everything there looked like it had some edges to hold in the standard warming models, but anyone who works with the land knows that losing the cold in areas like mine that rely on a deep winter freeze, if you lose that good hard freeze, you get way more problems with pests, with molds and diseases. You get all kind of trouble. Tipping point impacts that are likely to reduce the rate of winter change in this big center continent area, stabilize winter lows closer to regional norms. Even in a warming world, that would provide some stability to producers in that broad region. And check this out. I'm looking at summer temps. I'm looking at June, July, August temperatures. I'm sticking a pin in the map kind of in the center of the L1 region. Let's go over to the Wisconsin side of that border. If we're looking at the pre-industrial climate, average is 24.4 with collapsed AMOC going up to 26.2. If you can't do degrees C in your head, just see, look, it's a little increase compared to if AMOC was on, we'd be looking at a bigger increase in those summer temperatures. So we're still going to see hotter summers, but not as much so as we would have in this region in the absence of the tipping point. This might keep us below thresholds for knockout on pollination, on grain set, on pod fill. It's another edge to hold related to tipping point changes in that broad sweep around the Great Lakes. So a person living in this area of relative stability, relative opportunity, what do you do? Anyone who has driven through this marvelously boring broad stretch of land knows what we mostly grow here. Corn, soy, and a lot of it. But we could be growing a lot more kinds of produce. We used to before globalization dramatically changed local markets and lifeways. In my area, we still do. Grow a lot. I want to show you because this is just one of the many giant pails and buckets in which people have been dropping off large quantities of apples at my house. We've been feeling the change on the ground here. We've been experiencing more heat, more humidity. But this year we got some rain finally, and everything is going nuts. My home production has been off the hook. And locally, all fruit production has been so wild. My home community, my people I care about around me, they're now saying we got to save all the jugs for the fall cider press. We're washing all the jugs out of my place. This is a chore the household is tolerating well. We got a lot of comments about that we're living the jug life. We're capable of incredible table crop production here in the Midwest, both now and going into the future, as well as core staple crop production. We are facing challenges, but we're facing challenges that farmers are already showing resilience and response to change. Many of our areas are building great local food systems too. Strong, diverse farmers markets that are connected to community processing centers. I was sent this link by a friend in Ohio who wanted me to show off the density of their members and farmers markets in this area. But this resource, localharvest.org, it's really useful for anyone. It can show you what's going on in your area if you haven't connected with the scene. If the Central Valley is going to see major declines, if it's not going to be in play, if the future trend for the Central Valley is way down, the whole market around table crops is going to change. Distributed table crop production is likely to become economically feasible for mid-sized farmers. We need a farm bill that supports regenerative, distributed ag, not a farm bill that supports agribusiness as usual, so that American farmers can have a fair shot in this time of change. Now, some of the way I defined that broad sweep of land going into the Dakotas, the reason it's bordered on the west is because there's a line of aridity coming in from the west. The edges of the line of aridity, and anyone who's been out in that landscape knows that you get into a very arid landscape. They're related not so much to the winter change, but to the summer change, to big heat increases as you enter that arid region. And again, just as we saw in the Central Valley, just as is the case beneath Yuma, the extreme heat increases correlate to groundwater abuse. As we saw in the Central Valley, there are places in the U.S. looking at really serious high-end heat increases, much hotter summers in both intensity and duration, which is not just a problem for human health. Of course, it's also a problem for livestock, and it's a problem for plants. Once we start getting long stretches of summer heat over 95, we start to see reductions in grain fill and pod fill. You can get long stretches over 100, often resulting in crop failure. Over 105, we're going to lose production for most of our conventional staple crops. They're going to get knocked out by 105 temps. You may notice, going back into Jackie's visualization of that NCA 5 standard warming information, a big stretch of that high-end heat is projected to shoot up from Texas into the plains. Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, there's some rough stuff in that outlook. We talked about groundwater issues in the Southwest. Y'all ought to know that the Ogallala underlies a lot of that troubled region, and it's been terribly abused. The groundwater in that sort of southern Great Plains region has been abused completely without regard for future generations. And sometimes I see that pattern of big high-end heat increases right where the groundwater has been worst treated. And I respond not with like the scientist part of me, not with my head, right? But with my heart. And it's like I feel and see the wrath rising out of the earth where the groundwater has been abused. In those areas in the southern Great Plains, you might want to start experimenting with pearl millet. If you want a grain that's going to be able to set and fill over 105, pearl millet is your grain to watch. Let's turn our attention now to Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. We'll move on from there to the Southeast and then the Northeast, just so you know that everyone's going to get some attention. When we're talking about the Pacific Northwest, for folks who have been studying on these issues for some time, you may recall that since 2018, since we got the NCA 4, the climate models have been projecting more serious concerns around temperature swings and extreme events in the Pacific Northwest than the rest of the nation. Y'all are top of the list for likelihood of extreme events of all kinds. that's been felt throughout the transnational Pacific Northwest region. Last 5 years, up by Kelowna, folks have been seeing killing frost. They've seen searing heat, both at extremes beyond what was expected. This summer, we've been seeing extended heat and drought in the Pacific Northwest with many fires. And I'm pulling up the drought monitor here because this is rough, and people outside the region ought to see that red in Washington. That's very concerning, and that is what's happening now. As we look at current trends in climate, with the tipping point in play, we have some projections showing that the tipping point may bring more moisture back into the Pacific Northwest. And we are seeing a somewhat cold stabilizing trend in the new modeling. Let's look. Spokane, let's take a little look at you as a good example of this trend. If we were looking at a conventional warming scenario, an AMOX-on scenario, you were looking at a big shift, much milder winters than we had as a pre-industrial baseline. In collapsed AMOC, that change is reduced. You're still looking at a reduction in winter lows, but it's closer to that pre-industrial baseline. It's going to take some of the edge off that winter loss. And that is the case around this region. I want you to watch the line here and see that blue advance, AMOC on to collapsed AMOC. Big advance of that blue cooler temperature. And you can see right here, let's drop a pin on Seattle. AMOC on, AMOC off. It's still a lift. It's still pulling you further above freezing, but it's a smaller lift. It's very easy to drop a pin on this map wherever you are and check out the factor change with that tipping point yourself. So those are some potential tipping point positives very locally for the Pacific Northwest. That more stable winter cold might help stabilize forest health. It might help stabilize some snowpack. Wherever we're seeing trends away from snowpack fed towards rain dominant water systems, we're seeing very high levels of landscape change and we're seeing fire emerge. I hope that these integrated models are showing science that would reduce the severity of those impacts. But even as we may see a moderation of change trends for this region, it is important to note the Pacific Northwest will remain the region of the U.S. most likely to see edge events, to see extreme events. I'm going to show you more good news in a minute. I just don't want you to get too excited. Seattle, I want to look at you again in terms of summer temps. When we were looking at AMOC on, we were looking at a pretty significant increase from your pre-industrial baseline in your June, July, August temperature. Still warmer, but not as big an increase in summer temps by 2C as we had expected in standard warming pathways with AMOC on. So again, not as bad, not as much summer warming in this collapse scenario for the Pacific Northwest. We see that effect particularly pronounced in the Pacific Northwest and in parts of the Midwest. You should take some time to drop a pin in that map yourself, amocscenarios.org, to look at change differences in your location. Folks in the Pacific Northwest, for your region where this tipping point scenario changes the projection information the most in the U.S., my big advice is to think about those edges. Watch the edges, because you can't put any plants in and trust they're not going to get taken out by some weird, horrible edge event. You're first in the nation for edge events. Giant atmospheric river, heat dome, super freeze. All of them are likelier to happen in your region than anywhere else. You know, a lot of your historic climate, I think many of us think about it in the imagined Pacific Northwest, along the coast there. It's this mild climate, like this lovely, even greenness. When we look to the future, in the absence or presence of that ocean heat transport tipping point, you're looking at more of a spiky, irregular greenness. But it's still green. Thinking about the tipping point, the ocean phase change situation, we read about it in terms of AMOC and the popular science understanding, but I don't know. Science acknowledges we don't fully understand this tipping point we're in, and when I look at current Earth system evidence, We're looking at change emerging in the ACC, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. The ACC is like the serpentine belt for the entire ocean heat transport system worldwide. So I think it's likely things are going to unfurl in the Pacific Ocean as well as the Atlantic. Our global situation is going to be just so complexly messed up. In that amoxscenarios.org, we're visualizing temperature. We're not yet looking at precipitation or wind changes. I've tried to be really clear about that all along, but those are going to be intense. We're expecting really weird weather globally. The evidence we have, the ocean phase change trend we're seeing, even with those extreme disruptions, we're looking at potentially more positive impacts for the Pacific Northwest than any other region of the US. Caveat on land, the likely outcomes for ocean life in this bottleneck here in which we all find ourselves are really serious. We're talking about enormous reduction in ocean carrying capacity for life, tremendous change of ecosystems, food webs, and species distribution around the world's oceans. So terrestrial food systems on land are really important. We should assume that the sea will cease to give as it has as we go through this time of change. I would say we should stop taking from the sea before that point as a kindness to the life there that remains. Give it a shot. Give it a shot for some more generations by not eating it. Southwest. Things are not as good for you as for the Pacific Northwest from an ag systems point of view. The likely precipitation trend in this change time is a drought trend for your region, likely to intensify your current drought trend, which was likely to intensify under a current warming model, a conventional warming model. Everything we learn in this developing field of science, in this developing field of climate modeling, it just kind of keeps turning the dial up on the Southwest drought trend. The heat increases in the Southwest are really big. We already looked at some of those hot spots in Southern California, the Central Valley, and Arizona. The Southwest is a region with some very difficult outlooks. Places where there is hope, yes. Regional context, difficult. Overall, if you're interested in continuing to grow in the Southwest, thinking about water as a big limiting factor to an even greater degree than we do today. And if you want to get even more serious about water than most of us in the Southwest already have been, you're really going to want to embrace indigenous seeds. I would recommend nativeseeds.org for sourcing that. And I'd like to again highlight the temporary beam, which is sold here in a quantity you can eat. You can try it out, see how you like it. This is an incredibly drought-resistant bean that would likely be able to continue to produce under projected conditions across models, because this bean is the toughest, and people cultivated this bean. People put together this genetic package, this richness in this bean during less Southwest megadrought. So this is built to withstand megadrought conditions. All right, Southeast, let's talk about you. And we're going to start by visualizing that line of cold extreme events again. In 2C AMOC on, that's conventional warming scenario. Collapse that AMOC and you see that line comes further down, impacting my friends in the Southeast. But I feel like we don't need to just look at a line on a map. We can remember the crazy winter storm in this past winter of 24-25, which dropped this big snow on New Orleans. And this storm didn't just hit New Orleans, it dropped significant snow all the way around the Gulf, major snow in Florida. Those kind of extreme winter events, they've long been projected to occur more often as things get weird, as the Gulf Stream gets wobbly. Even recently, like 2022, scientific consensus was that it was highly unlikely this system was going to really get destabilized in our lifetimes. There's unexpected observational signals emerging since 23 that things are really getting weird, which is why these AMOC up-down scenarios need some serious attention. In the Southeast, especially, how can we talk seriously about climate unless we address the fact that they're getting these winter extreme events, right? And in the Southeast, where you're looking generally at a winter that's pretty normal for your region, your winters weren't projected to change much overall in terms of average temperatures, and they're still not, regardless of tipping point scenario. But those moments of intensity, the intense freeze events, they're likely to be more intense and more frequent as we continue gathering evidence and moving down that tipping point timeline. Got plenty of growing season to work with and an ability to put out really cool regional varietals on the table crops front. With your summer conditions looking very extended of your traditional hot seasons, so you're not looking at like big 105 plus increases, you're just looking at 2 Louisiana Augusts instead of 1, making African seeds that are tolerant of long extended hot seasons really valuable. You might enjoy sourcing those at Ajama Seeds. I learned about them at the Seed Savers Exchange Conference, and I find there to be something like a little like charming and authentic about their webpage here, where their top menu has become an overwhelming hero page, making it a little difficult to read about the African garden. But you can see here that this is a place where you can get various varieties of okra, amaranth, black-eyed peas, yam, jute mallow, bitter leaf, African eggplant, and more. There's a deep tradition and deep genetic diversity in the culturally significant seed collections at Ujama Seeds. I think it's cool to consider different heritage crops for your region that are likely to keep handling the heat and the time of change to come. And I want to address right here my southern friends who are like, Emily, there's not really going to be a change in freezes or what we can overwinter. I know because the land tells me so. I hope all of you are experiencing a moment of complete vindication here because this tipping point model agrees with you completely. Increasing severe storms, though, with the tipping point, they're a real threat for your region. We're looking at big rains, deluge-type rains in standard warming and no sign of them letting up in tipping point modeling. In the tipping point modeling, I see real concerns about increased wind speed potential in the Southeast, scary storms. Thinking about wind might help you get ahead of the game in the Southeast. Thinking about providing shelter. I hear a lot of reports coming in from people in your region about UV damaged plants that used to want to be in full sun. Now it's killing them. So shelter from UV, shelter from wind, thinking about how to provide that shelter both at home and at scale is a problem worth considering. That could be an area for innovation. Last but not least, let's talk about the Northeast. I hope you've been hearing my message throughout this video, which is table crops, table crops, table crops. You want to keep up some staple crop production in your region, but the table crop production is an important focus. You don't need to think about growing 100% of your calories. Just anybody listening, that's not practical or reasonable for most people. Focus on nutrients, and you find nutrients in table crops. Distributed table crops, that's what you want in all your regional food systems, every region, and that looks especially important for the Northeast. The big challenges in your region aren't projected changes to temperature so much. I know that you all can't handle it in some parts of the Northeast. When it gets above 80, that's very uncomfortable for you. I know the current projected summer temp increases do not sit well with you all, even though they are below the national change average. You all are looking at the lowest increase in days over 95 of anyone. Look at this in the visualization that Jackie made. We're looking at days over 100. White is a lot. Black is not a lot. You have very few really hot days projected to come to your region at 2C. You look really good on the high-end heat increases regardless of tipping point. For you all, the big ag resilience issues, they're going to be water, irregular water, with summer droughts and periods of intense deluge, periods of way too much rain. Thinking about how water moves over the landscape. Thinking about capturing, storing, and distributing water. Those are your big regional challenges, both in an ag and a built environment context. And those water challenges, it's worth noting that water is power. Having a too much water problem is something of a water opportunity. As you look towards the west, I talked about that line of aridity as you get out onto the plains. But even looking out towards my place in Iowa, or just looking a little closer, looking at Ohio, we have a major challenge written in the geologic history of our land of serious multi-year droughts. We do see that in that sort of big Midwestern region, occasional serious multi-year droughts. Those hit us sometimes, they knock us back hard. That could take out stable production irregularly as we're moving into this challenging future. The Northeast, on the other hand, tends to be a little too wet most of the time, but at least you're consistent. You're not likely to get sucked into our mega drought cycle, meaning that your producer regions are really important. By the end of, say, 7-year mega drought in the Midwest, everyone would be noticing and valuing producer communities in the Northeast. I think it's also particularly important to consider land conservation as a major issue in your region. If you're going to need regional table crop production, you're going to need land. And in your densely populated region, where we're looking at such severe impacts from sea level rise projections, there's going to be a lot of pressure on land. And maybe this is a pipe dream, but I wonder if getting more involved in regional food systems could help reduce that land pressure in your region. If people are eating from their home region, maybe they'll value the food producing areas in the region a little more, care more about their needs, stop treating them as completely exploitable. Because in much of the Northeast, that's a huge problem, driving major social tension that's palpable on the ground, an urban rural divide that is more severe and hateful than in many parts of the country. There's room for things to get better in that system from a sociocultural perspective. Across the Northeast, more people need to remember the deep value to connect with the deep relationship to the land. Okay, folks. I hope this gives everyone some top line regional suggestions they can use as we think about the impacts of change trends on our national food systems. Of course, we import a ton of food in the US, especially food we like, such as nice European products, super high quality goods from South Korea and Japan, specialty food products from all over the world. The global impacts of the tipping point scenario, which I covered in more depth in this video here, tipping point update, just a couple of weeks ago. Those global impacts are really serious. The impacts to Northern Europe, particularly severe. More nations are going to need to export less food. More nations will experience calorie shortages, not just nutrient shortages. This video has been pretty upbeat because we've been focusing on the largest, least impacted landmass in these global projections. But global systems matter, obviously. And right now, we're living in a global food system, not a local food system. A lot of the food many of us eat today is grown in one country, packaged in another, and then shipped here. The global food system outlook is complex, scary, and almost universally very bad on every factor. Detaching from the global food system, localizing your food system is a reasonable response to increase your resilience. And you can do that no matter where or how you live. You don't need to grow all your own stuff. You don't even need to grow any stuff. You can support your local farmers market. You can support local CSAs, that's community supported agriculture. And you can work to help increase and improve access to local processing equipment and infrastructure, as well as distribution infrastructure. If your local farmers market is just a summer pop-up, maybe talk with the folks who are setting that up, because I bet they've thought about getting a year-round location. Maybe you could help make that connection. Many community centers used to have community processing equipment so people could can together or mill a huge amount of applesauce together. If your community shows interest, local governments often want to write grants for these kinds of equipment that could promote community engagement. Fantasizing about an off-grid lifestyle where you mill all your own wheat might be fun, and it might even be cool. But if you want to build resilience in a more practical way, if you want a food system that's more likely to keep going in these times of change, relatively boring community-centered actions are important. They're a good way to go. Your actions can be small and your outreach can easily go into a community-centered context. Like, bring a letter to your parks and rec department signed by everyone who wants a community cider press for fun fall activities. It's more successful with most government officials than screaming into the void about horrifying climate apocalypse that the community will need cider to dull the pain before we expire. Like, seriously, if we want these resilient systems, we can make arguments for the stuff that focuses on immediate good and that protects us from scary future stuff, even if we don't slap, oh, we're all going to die sticker on the side of that new equipment. It's important to think strategically. I think a strong national food system looks entirely possible in the face of projected changes at 2C, whether we're looking at AMOC up or down scenarios. It will be challenging. We are going to see drops in production. It's likely we'll need to think differently and more responsibly about groundwater and irrigation to offset the increased irregularities in weather. And more producers will need to create shelter from wind, hail, and other extreme events. We're seeing farmers do that now. There's a lot of hoop house construction, a lot of deliberate shade planting for intercropping. I really think we have the margin we need to work these edges, to respond to change and keep a healthy, diverse food system rolling in the US. That's in a context where, in either scenario, the global food system looks really shaky at 2C. Ground up action is going to help our communities build resilience where we are in these times of change, and I think food systems are a great place to put our focus. Thanks for spending some time learning with me. I'll look forward to talking with you all again soon. Folks, thanks for spending some time learning with me. American Resiliency is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit. We're supported entirely by donations from the community. We recently changed up our donations, hit the Donate Now button on our page, AmericanResiliency.org. People used to just donate through PayPal to us, but everyone tells me they hate PayPal. So we got a new system where we can take donations through Stripe, Google Pay, Apple Pay, and PayPal if you're still comfortable with that. So if you ever thought about supporting AR, but you really hate PayPal, I just want to let you know we put some time in on that issue. Again, the support of the AR community is the reason this video exists. I want to take a moment to thank most sincerely the donors, the volunteers, everyone spreading the word online, and especially everyone doing the work on the ground. I feel like I could really flesh out these regional ag stories. If you'd be interested in that, in more like ag shift information type videos with a more local focus, please comment or get in touch through the contact form on our website, AmericanResiliency.org. Thanks for spending some time learning with me today, and I'll look forward to talking with you all again soon.